the zero matrix. Write an algorithm such that if an element in an m by n matrix is 0, its entire row and column are set to 0. So let's imagine that we have a m by n matrix. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 0, 11, 12, 0, or no, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So if that's our input, the output would be something like this. So let me fix the columns. And so our output would look something like this, where the columns and rows of the cells that had 0 elements in them are now set to 0. So in order to achieve this, I think we should loop through the matrix or the 2D array, and then we would have to create an array called 0 columns, and then add the j or index of 0 cells to that array. And after that, we can set every element in the row that had a 0 element to 0. And then we will loop through the matrix again, and this time we will pay close attention to the inner arrays and set any element that its j is stored in 0 columns to 0, so that all columns that had 0 elements would be set to 0. So now what is the big goal of this algorithm? So I'm doing some rough estimations, and I think the big O is O of n, but O of n squared. Yeah, I had a mistake and I just corrected that. So let's get back to our code and see if our console is working. Great, it is. And now let's work on our method. So let's see. We want to do this in place, preferably. And what that means is that our return type would be void. How Java works is that we have a memory, and this memory has two locations, stack and heap. The main function, the main class, the methods, and variables are all on the stack, but whenever we have a variable that is of reference type, um, like objects, instances of classes, they are stored in the heap, and their reference or their address is only stored in the variables that are in our stack. So we won't change the reference of our input. We will work on the same reference that we get as an input, and then when we print the input after the function is ran, we will get different results in the initial 2D array, which is our matrix. So I'm just pseudocoding what we wrote in our notes, and so we want to loop through the matrix again and look at 0 columns array. Now let's create that 0 columns array. So it's a byte array, and I'm going to say let's initialize it to size 2, but we don't know what happens if a column gets repeated. If it was a hash map, it would take care of it automatically. But yeah, implementing a hash map for this problem is not ideal, so we will try to see if we can come up with anything during our solution. So I'm going to calculate the matrix rows and columns in advance, and I'm going to loop through the matrix, and whenever we see an element which is 0, its value is 0, we will want to add the j of that element to the 0 columns array, but apparently there's no append or add or put or insert methods attached to the byte array class. So let's see. I'm seeing in Stack Overflow that we have to implement that method by ourselves manually, but if we use the ArrayList class, it will be implemented automatically for us. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to let Java decide what the initial capacity of 0 columns array should be, and I'm going to add, if during our traverse, when we are traversing through the matrix, if we find a 0 element, we will add that to our 0 columns array, and then we will set a boolean that we just created called row had 0 to true. And then after getting out of the row, if the row had 0, we will create a new array with length similar to the length of our matrix, and then we will reset the value of row had 0 to false, so that it all works correctly again for the next iteration of I. And yeah, the reason we're just creating a new array as well is that when we create a new array in Java, all of its indices are set to 0 by default, unless we specify otherwise. So now I'm looping through the array again. On the outer loop, I'm doing a simple normal for loop. In the inner loop, I'm using for each loop. And yeah, so we are testing our function now. Yeah, if we call that method on our input array, it will do its job basically. And at the end of this function, what I did was that I am trying to skip every row that already is set to 0, so that we are not concerned with this call.